for attending this seminar. Today we are going to be talking about, is your industry going to be recognisable this time next year? The answer is, we're not sure at this stage. So, on my panel, I have Wescott from the Veezu group. I have delighted to have Ruth Cadbury, the chair of the Transport Select Committee. Next to her is Jim Button from Button Solicitors, the author of Button on Taxes and from the Institute of Licensing. Next to him, Mike Smith from the Institute of Licensing and the licensing manager from Guildford Borough Council. Stephen Toy, our very own Vice Chair of the National Private Highway and Taxi Association. And, Dave? David Hunter from TakeMe Group, who you may have seen, was doing the taxi podcasts, answering lots and lots of questions over a series of weeks. So before we open up the panel to the questions to the floor, I'm going to ask the panel to briefly introduce themselves. And please do keep it brief, because we are time limited. I've been told that the event closes on Thursday. I'm joking. We've got about an hour and a half. However, this seminar has been scheduled for the last one. So if we do overrun a little bit, we're all right. We've got that little bit of flexibility. But I want to focus on your questions. This is your time to shine. Okay? So, Andrew, first. Oh, sorry. Let's do it the other way around then if you had them. No, it's all right. Carry on.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrew Wescott from Veezu, so we're a national private hire operator operating in 62 locations around England and Wales. Do you want to do anything, Gambit, or just a brief introduction?
Just a brief introduction, and then when you've done the brief introductions, I may ask you a follow-up question.
Just in terms of this topic, I think obviously there's been some activity today that I think makes it very, very relevant, even though it already was, because everybody's got their view and an interest in it, and I think it would be great to have the debate. And I suppose the key thing for me is just making sure that everyone's engaged and informed and go through this process, because that's what's going to get us to the point where we get a really good and robust piece of legislation.
Thank you. Ruth?
Hello, I'm Ruth Cadbury. I'm a Labour MP of 11 years, standing representing a constituency, Park Hounslow in West London. It's called Brentford and Isleworth. And since September 2024, I've chaired the Transport Select Committee. Important to recognise that select committees scrutinise and hold to account the government department, its agencies and operators, in our case in the transport sector. I'm not a government minister, I'm not in government, I'm in Parliament. I think I'm now referred to as a senior MP, which is, I'm still learning my way around after 11 years. So we do a number of different things, but we hold deep dive inquiries, and as many of you know, and probably you've been reading in your trade press, that we've been holding an inquiry on taxis and private hire licensing. Thank you to all of those of you who submitted evidence, and some of you who actually came as witnesses to our oral sessions. The work is complete. We were just about to publish in the next 2 weeks, I think, our report on our inquiry, which normal practice would be we'd send to government and they would come back within 8 weeks with their response to our recommendations. But for any of you who have spotted this morning, the King's speech seems to have, I don't know whether there was a leak of our draft report, or to be fair, actually, I think the government, and Lillian Greenwood in particular, who was my chair when I was on the Transport Committee in previous parliaments, I think she's very much on the same page about why this stuff is important to our constituents who use taxis and private hire, and to our constituents who are drivers. So this is a really important issue for the Labour government, and I'll say a bit more later, but the fact that so much of what we covered in our inquiry, which is all in the public domain, even if our report isn't, the government appears to have picked up and taken seriously, but obviously particularly triggered by the Casey review.
Thank you. Jim?
Good afternoon, everybody. Jim Button, jobbing solicitor, President of the Institute of Licensing, and I'm here this afternoon in my institute guise, but I'm also the author of a textbook on taxi law, and I specialise in taxi law. Echo everything that Ruth has said, actually. The idea of new taxi law is tremendous. Bring it on. My concerns, because I'm a natural cynic, are the time it's going to take, but this should be completely apolitical. We're looking at apolitical. Yes, apolitical. This is looking at your businesses, looking at public safety, and public safety includes you as drivers, and nobody surely can stand up and say, I'm not interested in promoting business or public safety. So, fingers crossed, let's get it happening.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, yes, and good afternoon. I'm Mike Smith, I'm the licensing manager at Guildford Borough Council in Surrey. I also the part of the South East region, the Institute of Licensing. I'm here with that hassle today. I also author the All Things Licensing column in monthly PHTM, which hopefully some of you have read. To echo sort of previous comments, yes, legislative reforms are overdue. There are concerns and problems dealing with the law day in, day out, both drivers, vehicle operators and licensing operators themselves. So very much advocates that the reform is long overdue. I won't get too exciting to actually happen, but certainly we need something that's going to work for everybody, with the needs of public safety, everybody's safety and for the business. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen?
Hi, I'm Stephen Toy. I'm Vice Chair of the National Private Island Taxi Association. I'm also a licensed taxi driver myself for over 31 years. So I know the trade, I've worked in it myself, so when anybody says to me, you don't understand because you're not a driver, I am. I'm one of you guys. And I'm here to help this industry to survive and help you to prosper and ensure that you can earn a decent living without working dangerously long hours. That's my objective.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, thanks very much, Dave. I'm David Hunter. I'm the CEO of a group called TakeMe, and we actually hold 32 different operating licenses across the country. And so dealing with it from an operator's point of view, it'd be great to see some progress in having all those little quirky rules that have been interpreted from the 1976 Act streamlined into some kind of national playing field, and to have an open and frank discussion about how, moving forward, we have something that's fit for purpose for the future as well. So it's an honour to be here, and it'd be great to hear the questions and get involved in some of those discussions.
Thank you. So as you can see, you have a real expert panel in front of you right now, from legislators, law practitioners, council representative bodies, operators, drivers, associations, all right in front of you. Feel free to ask questions because this is for you. And the things that are coming right in front of you right now include cross-border hiring, which I don't agree with that term. I think it's been misquoted. The actual issue or the mischief that we're trying to achieve here is eliminating predominant out-of-area use, which is the act of a driver sitting around hundreds of miles away from their licensing authority full-time without any booking to justify them being there. You've also got national standards that are about to be discussed and about to be launched as starting from next week. You've got Devolution Empowerment Bill, which is the amalgamation of local authorities, which is going to affect you. Is it going to make your licenses cheaper? Is it going to make them quicker? Are these national standards going to include questions asked of local authorities with regards to fees, with regard to turnaround times for your application? And a national standard is going to stop license shopping. When you go shopping, you look for price and availability. That's it. So all of these things are going to affect you in the coming year. What are your concerns? Has anybody got any questions from the audience? What is you right now?
Thank you. My name is Mark Robinson. I've got a taxi company down in the Medway towns. We've got a couple of hundred vehicles. the area is inundated with Uber drivers that are working under licensing for TfL. We're actually carrying out a bit of a survey at the moment. We've got, we think, about 400 midway licensed drivers, which we've got about half, and the other half are independent typically. We reckon there's twice that number, about 800, maybe up to 1,000 Uber drivers from the licensed TfL that are predominantly working in midway. The question I've got is if the legal situation changes to give enforcement rights to the local council, I don't think that's going to make too much difference because the local council doesn't have the resources to police. So is this something that's going to eventually be resolved by like national legislation which makes it a legal issue, or is it going to be put in the hands or left in the hands of the council to enforce the laws as they develop it?
Okay, so you may have seen the amendment to the Devolution Empowerment Bill, which granted the power to suspend for up to 48 hours. Okay? What you might not have seen is that that also includes the risk of compensation being awarded to the driver if it is that that suspension is deemed to have been incorrect. Ruth, do you have a comment on that?
Can I just start on out of area operation? And I actually sort of have a question to the other panellists. So legally, out of area operation could start after the 2015 deregulation under the Conservative government. That's how it was able to start, as I understand it. But what has driven it? What's the incentive to get licensed out of your own area? And what's been happening is, I mean, are drivers making rational choices, or put it another way, gaming the system, because the different authorities have a whole variety on the cost of the licence, the time of the turnaround of the original application, the time of the turnaround for renewal, the way different standards are imposed, particularly things like English language, and the quality of checks on drivers' criminal and risk history, which was a concern that was raised with us by at least one witness, drivers that were banned in one area, weren't in another. So if we had consistent and high, or even standard, we have complete core standards, not a minimum, but an absolute standards, would that actually mean there would be no need for out-of-area licensing and operation? Because it strikes me that the inconsistency in the varieties in the way the different local authorities operate has been the driver, what has driven out-of-area operation. In fact, Wolverhampton, I know you have mixed views about Wolverhampton as drivers, but they said it just so happened that we had put in a new IT system in their department at the time when the new legislation came in, and therefore they could turn around applications quicker and cheaper than most other local authorities. So that's why everybody went into Wolverhampton. Others, we also heard people say that the standards are more lax or easier to get through than local authorities. So that's my question back really to the others, because I don't know the answer.
If I may, cross-border activity was lawful before the Deregulation Act. What the Deregulation Act did was allow subcontracting across borders. And that's, with respect, a marked distinction. It has exploded since 2015, there's no doubt about it. As the law stands at the moment, it's lawful. We are now on the threshold, possibly a few steps back from the threshold, of having new law. And the new law has got to address these concerns. In terms of standards, we have the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Act, which is a mouthful, and that will allow the introduction of national standards. Now, those national standards are dependent upon regulations, so again, it isn't going to happen by the weekend, but it is a start. What I suspect, and I'm very conscious that our colleagues from the DFT are here, and I don't want to embarrass them or put words in their mouth, what I suspect is that this is a stepping stone to building up to this new legislation. And that has to be applauded. In terms of economies of scale, yes, Wolverhampton have enormous economies of scale. Taxi licence fees are ring-fenced within a local authority. They can't be used for anything else. So, because they have so many drivers, operators and vehicles, because their fees can only be used for taxi licensing, those fees have to be lower. They have a very slick operation, and their standards are good. They are not perhaps the absolute acme. For example, they do not require CCTV in their vehicles, but they are a great deal better than some authorities. It's this lack of consistency that is the problem. And to my mind, one of the most absurd examples of that is somebody can be found to be a fit and proper person in, for the sake of argument, Brighton, but found not to be a fit and proper person in Newcastle upon Tyne. You're safe wherever you are. You're not safe wherever you are. And the same would apply to vehicle safety. Vehicle standards may vary. Not everywhere needs all their hacks to be wheelchair accessible. That is a reasonable variation. But there should be no difference in safety standards anywhere, because safety is paramount. Without the public believing in your industry as being a safe form of transport, they won't use it. So it's in everybody's interest that that safety standard is not only created, but then maintained.
I think it's also worth noting on there, to pick up on that point, Jim, the Deregulation Act allowed subcontracting operator to operator. And what we're finding is a lot of confusion where drivers think that they can be subcontracted from an operator licensed anywhere, and they can't. The triple lock rule prevents that. So it is an operator in area A may subcontract to an operator in area B, not operator to driver directly. So that's an important distinction there.
Just to sort of take it back to the gentleman's original question, so there is provision in the Community Empowerment Bill for local authorities to enforce against drivers, vehicles and operators which are outside of their area. The devil will be in the detail, and I understand your concerns around sort of drivers and vehicles licensed by Transport for London, but switching in the authority. So what has got to happen is that where you have sort of the smaller authorities in Midway or Surrey, then if they are to be expected to go out and police drivers, vehicles and operators, they are not licensed, don't have these resources in order to do so. How that will work, I don't know. But there definitely will be in the detail as to how the Act is converted into regulations, because there are potential significant risks for local authorities, because there is a provision in the Act whereby if a local authority officer suspends potentially a national operator from operating for 48 hours, that is significant, potentially millions of pounds worth of journeys over that period. If they're found to be wrong, the local authority is going to be potentially financially accountable for that decision. So there's going to be a huge sort of development of how local authorities are going to implement the system, huge information sharing concerns. I think I wrote about this in sort of May's PHTM, so please have a look at that article. There are a huge number of issues that need to be ironed out in order for this much welcomed sort of cross-border enforcement powers to actually work in practice. I completely understand why it was introduced. It's been a long-running concern for a long period of time, as obviously mentioned in the case in court, and it's great that something has started to happen in order to try and address it, but in order for it to be addressed effectively, the devil will be in the detail as to how it is implemented in practice in both the bigger authorities and the smaller authorities. Hopefully that helps.
I think it's important to remember the passenger in all this as well. We often talk about it as operators and legislators and so on, but clearly safety is the core component of this, and Jim made all points around ensuring that we clear up any of those issues around inconsistencies on safety. But ultimately, passengers want to get from A to B possibly as cheaply as possible, but as quickly as possible and as smoothly as possible, and potentially get a journey back as well. So it's important when we look at all these different changes that we ensure that a passenger isn't inconvenienced, that there's enough supply in areas to make sure those passengers have availability, because ultimately, if there's a lack of supply, there will be a lack of safety, because there isn't public transport provision in areas, particularly late at night, to provide passengers with safe journeys home. So I think that's a really core component when we look at this, because we're possibly coming at it from one side, but sometimes ignore or forget that side of it.
Thank you. Stephen?
As I recall, the case report did more than suggest that the cross-border issue needs to be dealt with. I don't think redrawing the map is going to achieve that. I'll take my own area as an example. Cannock Chase is a very small district, but there are vehicles from 5 local authorities coming regularly into our area to find work. Now, if the map were redrawn, there is no way that new LTA, or strategic authority, is going to cover an area extending from Stoke-on-Trent all the way down to Dudley. It's just not going to happen. So instead of seeing vehicles from 5 different licensing authorities coming into our area, we might see them from 3 or 2. So we'll still have a cross-border problem. I believe that the only way we can deal with the cross-border issue is to legislate to stop it. And I think that empowering local authorities to enforce against vehicles and drivers from other areas carries a funding problem. The revenue for licensing is collected by the issuing authority, yet the cost is borne by another authority where they're working. How is that going to be balanced? Or is the second authority where the vehicle's working going to be able to invoice the issuing authority for their costs? And if they wrongly suspend a vehicle for 48 hours, as is proposed by the Law's amendments, who's going to be liable for the compensation? And isn't that going to dissuade local authorities from enforcing against vehicles from other areas?
Yeah, there is a huge risk there.
Yeah, and we've discussed that. I personally think we need to look at the mischief of cross-border, and that is somebody applying for a licence in an area where they have no intentions of working, or when they drop off in an area where they're not licensed, that they're waiting, loitering if you like, in anticipation, expectation and hope of being sent a booking to them while they're in that area. That needs to stop.
Okay. Jim and then Dave.
I think it's also important to understand what we're talking about when we're talking about enforcement against vehicles from other areas. If a driver is standing or applying for hire in an area in which they are not licensed as a hackney carriage driver in a vehicle, they commit a criminal offence. That offence can be prosecuted by the local authority in whose area that activity takes place. That's crystal clear. If they're not standing or applying for hire, what's the mischief? Now, whether you like it or not, the law as it stands allows a private hire vehicle or a hackney carriage to be outside its area awaiting a booking. Now, if they're not available for immediate hire, as a matter of fact, that's not a criminal offence. Now, you may say, well, the law should change. Maybe the law is going to change. But as it stands at the moment, that's the case. So there are powers for enforcement against unlawful standing or applying for hire. What other enforcement do you want? And that's a question that I think needs to be answered.
Okay. David.
I'm just, so I think Andrew brought up, let's look at the customer. So the customer doesn't really understand that there's different licensing authorities, different rules, different things. So they might be in a little town, let's take Market Harbour, which have a licensing authority, but maybe only 100 cars on it. Then on a Friday night, that whittles down to maybe 20 cars. But they're spilling out the bars, they need to get home, and so they'll go on an app, whether it be Uber or whoever, and they expect a car to turn up. They're not going to be worried about where it's licensed, they just want to get home at that time of night. And so demand kind of predicts supply and vice versa, and it's where do you find the equilibrium. So drivers then might go, well, there's demand in Market Harbour, but it's going to take me 12 months to get a licence because it's only a small operating licence authority. I know I'll go to Wolverhampton or Leicester where I might get processed quicker. So there's that aspect. If everything was on the same playing field and the same speed and the same process, then that driver would go to Market Harbour to get his licence rather than Leicester or Wolverhampton. Then there's the other aspect. So I'm hearing, a driver might end up out of town waiting for a job to come back or to go somewhere. So I'm hearing all the time about net zero and efficiencies and so on. So surely it would be better to feed that driver out of town to get him nearer back to his base or something, get him moving. So from my point of view, it just feels like we're hampering the trade with all these different licensing options and different rules and regulations and different playing fields. You can have a black car in one area, but you can't have a black car in another area. You need a white bonnet, or this area you can't have an advert on the side. And it just feels it's a minefield out there. So for a small business trying to operate and the rules keep changing, it just feels like we need some national set of rules that we're all playing up the same hymn sheet. So yeah, that's just my viewpoint.
Okay. I think that's, I'll come back to the audience in a second. You love the hands. All right. So I'll summarise very quickly. I think in the Transport Select Committee, Dr. Scott Arthur MP, he asked the question of Lillian Greenwood, are those national standards going to be absolute? And the answer was no, there's still going to be variation. In our view, if there's still going to be variation within the new national standards, you've already got that in the 76 Act, so where's the point in doing anything? So introducing national standards with regional variations isn't actually changing anything. So we need to be very careful on how we approach this and where we move forward with this. All right? And with that, I'm going to open it up to the audience again, so we've got hands everywhere. So we'll start here at the front. Yep. Can you introduce yourself, please?
My name is Miroslav Podleki. I'm a taxi driver, Hackney Carriage, working from Weybridge train station in Ambridge in Surrey. I've got two questions.
Okay.
Very quick. One question is quite interesting, as we were talking just right now. For example, my point, according to the taxi and private hire regulations, after the operators, after accepting the bookings, is the office, walk-in or over telephone, they should fulfill the booking. So, somehow, the app companies like Uber, Bolt and the others, the app companies are allowing the drivers to cancel the booking without the serious reason. The serious reason, for example, a puncture, accident, and this. So actually, what is the law is down there, regulations down there, everything down there, but it's completely been ignored. My belief maybe because they are mega, super big companies. But why they are microphone, I think, yeah. Why these mega giant companies are allowed last minute, last second to cancel the booking? Sometimes it's pregnant people waiting for the booking, disabled people. Journey could be really not very nice, but the driver decides, you know what, I'm not fulfilling this booking. So this is actually we don't need the new regulation. Is there? It's absolutely down there. It's been brought to the attention many times to the ministry, to the Department for Transport. Very sad that Mr. Paul Elliott is not here today. I was hoping to give him this question. But maybe the chair of the Transport Committee, Mrs. Ruth, Cadbury, can answer this or something like that. Maybe can bring it some way further, not maybe right now, maybe in the future, but this is a very serious matter. I'm a taxi driver, I'm getting these complaints. For example, we have to fulfill everything. We are not allowed to work for the app companies. We just, sorry, but my opinion is like on the lead. We have to stay in our area. We can't go any other areas. We have to come back into our area. We get surrounded by these app companies. They're acting, they do what they want. Okay, I have to finish this one question, and I'm going to give quickly the second one. At the moment in Surrey is going the views about the local government reorganization, when the 10-11 boroughs will be split into 2 boroughs, into East Surrey and West Surrey. It's less than 1 year to go. The licensing authorities, the Department of Transport, no one knows what's going to happen. It's less than 1 year to go. My fear and the worry is what is happened in Northamptonshire. The drivers recently, a few months ago, I believe the drivers been sent to the knowledge test. Each driver had around 20-30 years of experience as working as a taxi driver. Not a single, according to the BBC article, not a single driver have passed the knowledge test. Because the area is huge, massively too big. For example, when it's 10 boroughs split into the 5, and then each site is getting 5 boroughs, because I have to maybe remind some people who don't know, we have to know that pretty much each road, each building, tennis club, you name it, is pretty much similar to London Black Cap. When is now Department for Transport is advising to remove the taxi zones and to make one zone, like in Cornwall, it looks like it's going to happen. Northamptonshire gets stuck. The licensing authorities, I believe, they said this is have to for a little while. We have to put on stop with this idea. I'm just, my question is what's going to happen to Surrey, and is because later on maybe going to be too late. If that going to be taken into the account? Thank you.
Well, that was quick.
Sorry.
That's all right. So you're quite right. Annabelle, Abdul, next please. So you're quite right. The DFT have, Abdul, the DFT have recommended abolishing the zones. We don't agree with the abolition, that was easy to say, of zones for exactly the reason you said. But also there's another reason as well. So number one, hackney garages. If you do away with zones, business is business. People are going to go to where the busier areas are. They're not going to sit in the rural areas outside in what were their own zones if they can just go to the centre. It's just not going to happen. Business is business. You all want to make money. All right? Secondly, as you've said, if you get, say for example, Transport for Greater Manchester, you've got Oldham, Rochdale, Bury, Stockport, Wigan, etc. You've got 10 different councils. All right? Each one of those that do have a knowledge test, have to learn their local zone, their region. Okay? If you make that Transport for Greater Manchester, each driver has then got to learn every street, every road, every train station, every school, every hospital, every hotel, every pub in a whole 532 square mile radius. You're going to abolish the entire industry because nobody's going to pass it, exactly as you've just said. So we're actually going to be making that presentation when we discuss these things at the national standards discussions. You did ask Ruth, if you've got anything to comment?
I'm going to answer this question as a resident of the UK, okay? Not as a Transport Committee Chair, because both of your questions on cancelled bookings and the knowledge test, we didn't go into, okay? But speaking as somebody who occasionally, even in London, where we have good public transport, and I have a car and sometimes drive it, not very often, but I do use, I generally use taxis and private hire, usually through Uber, I'm afraid, or Bolt. Well, why do I do that? Why does an average person with a smartphone keeping a quite eye on the pennies, why do they use those apps? My mother is 89, she has a smartphone, she keeps forgetting how to do a lot of stuff on it. She far prefers using Uber than phoning up and booking for a cab that might be cash only, and she'll have to stand on the side of the pavement in the rain or feeling vulnerable. When Uber, she can stay indoors, all of that sort of thing. We do need to understand the pros and cons of new tech. It really works in passengers' favour with the right tech. It works against them when it's abused by companies like Uber. I have been in the position where I've desperately needed to get a cab and seen a cab on its way, or looks like it's on its way, and it gets cancelled again and again. People who are disabled, that happens more than it doesn't have. So there must be a use of technology to stop that kind of abuse, particularly for any passenger who is flagged as being a wheelchair user, or having a guide dog, or having neurodiversity disability, or something like that. No, you know, that is blatant discrimination, but also, you know, for all sorts of reasons, but to a deep frustration to the passengers who need, you know, so many people in this country at different times and different places need your services. You are a core part of public transport. And in a more, you know, in too many areas, not where I live, but there are no buses, or they don't operate at night or at weekends. So, you know, so for so many people, you know, you're part of the public transport system. It has to work for all of UK residents in the way they use it. And as I say, tech is like weather. It can be good and it can be bad, and it needs to be good, and it needs to serve the drivers, the passengers, and the local authorities. And I think it could do so much better. And knowledge test failures, okay, I think I'm a fairly competent driver, obviously not a commercial driver, but a person who drives a car. I think I'm pretty competent. I would have thought now with sat-navs, I think, I'm sorry if there's anybody from LTDA here and other places, but I'm not sure the level of the knowledge detail is needed in the way that it clearly was before we had sat-nav. And you know, in real time, you know, Waze, Google Maps, whatever. I think there should be some competencies tested about how you use technology, what you do when the technology falls down, etc. When you're out of mobile coverage, well, no, because it's geo. It's not mobile, is it? It's
GPS.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there should be some basic competencies. I think you should have a certain level of knowledge of the area that you're based in. But, you know, frankly, you know, if I'm going from Heathrow to, I don't know, Swindon, you know, I don't expect the driver to know their way around Swindon. But, you know, there should be a way of feeling confident that that driver will get me to where I want to go to in Swindon.
If I may just pick up on a point that you made, Ruth, you are part of the public transport network, but you're not subsidised. Every other part of the public transport network, buses, trains, trams, ferries in places, aeroplanes in places, is subsidised. Hackney carriage and private hire activity is purely private enterprise. And as a consequence, you will naturally go where the work is, because you're not going to survive if you don't. And that's something that I think governments of all complexions at all times need to think about. If we are really going to have integrated public transport, and you can play an enormous part in that, there has got to be a mechanism whereby you get subsidised for that. Because otherwise, the rural bits, the backwaters, doesn't matter whether you've got zones or not. You can have as many zones as you like, but if there's no business in those zones, there ain't going to be no hacks in those zones. So I think that is a point that needs to be understood and recognised. If it's recognised, it may not be acted upon, but it needs at least to be acknowledged.
Yeah, thank you. Just to follow on there, so the two parts of your question and stuff. Regarding sort of drivers, counselling bookies, I'm sure some of my colleagues, either end of the panel, will have their view on that. But I mean, from a local authority perspective, most operators will under a condition if booking's accepted, then the car turns up. Either there'll be sort of redress via the local authority complaint process, or potentially sort of contractual redress. You know, if the car doesn't turn up and the customers, this is their genuine risk they're paying, for example, as a result of that. But I mean, from a local authority perspective, if a driver cancels a booking and a customer is there, then ultimately the customer is either going to complain or vote with their feet and use another provider. You know, go to you, off the rank if they cancel it. But turning to your sort of second question, that's more on my area. So sorry, yes, there is local organisation, 11 districts and boroughs, and the county council split into the two authorities, east and west. No decisions have been made yet as to what taxi and private hire licensing would look like in either East or West Surrey. The new authority was only elected last week and will start formally from the 1st of April next year. In that meantime, I would hope there will be a lot of work in order to sort of set the stall up to see how it's going to work in either East or West Surrey. I imagine there'll be lots of sort of continuing as we are, because in the rest of the world, it's very likely that a new consistent policy covering East or West Surrey will be sort of drafted, consulted on and adopted by the time we get to the 1st of April 2027. So it will be very much a case of waiting to carry on as we are for now, but then waiting to see, and any policy review will involve people from the trade as a stakeholder and others as to see how things may or may not work. So in answer to the question, no decisions have been made yet on zones, on vehicle driver operator standards.
No decisions
no decisions made yet at all. That will come at some point in the future.
I think this point about cancellations is one that needs to be looked at very carefully as we're going through now this new bill. I think that there's a balance between clearly safety being fundamental, reliability, and then choice, and that's choice for both the self-employed drivers and for passengers. Right? So we are now in a world of multi-apping and then other forms of booking. Veezu still take 30% of their bookings over the phone, but the reality is that both the CMA and the DFT have created a marketplace where drivers can choose which operator they take bookings from, and passengers can choose which operator they take their booking from. Right, so that there needs to be a kind of a review of that to understand where the balance between choice and safety lies, because obviously there are situations that, I'm sure you've highlighted there, where someone could be left stranded, someone who's vulnerable, and that shouldn't be allowed. The challenge, although licensing authorities do have conditions on this, they don't enforce the condition on drivers, and operators can't enforce that condition on drivers either, because ultimately drivers are self-employed and they have the choice of which booking they take. Now, at what point you can argue they should be able to return the booking or cancel the booking, I think is a very valid point, and one that we certainly need to explore. And I think you can make the same argument for a passenger cancelling bookings, because they do the same thing as well, so it works both ways.
Okay.
I'm going to begin with the knowledge, sorry, not the knowledge, the cancellation of bookings. For a long time I understood that legislation required the contract for hire to be between the operator and the passenger, so that in the event of a driver cancelling the trip, then the operator was obligated to find another driver. It would seem that legislation actually has been thrown into doubt given a recent Supreme Court judgment, which suggests actually there is some sort of arrangement with the apps between the driver and passenger, and the operator doesn't play a role at all. So if the driver does cancel, which they're free to do, the operator is under no obligation to find another driver. That needs to be addressed. As for the knowledge test, as an experienced driver, I use GPS occasionally. I use it as guidance rather than instruction. Occasionally I'll also, out of curiosity, see what the suggested route would be. And I've worked out that in approximately 30 to 40% of cases, all of the suggested routes given to me by Google Maps or alternatives actually prolong the journey in distance, time, or both. That demonstrates to me that while the technology may be wonderful, it's far from perfect. And there is definitely still a need for local knowledge and encourage drivers.
But not at the level of detail.
Not at the level of detail, but if you're running a meter and you're prolonging the journey because of inaccuracies in GPS, that's going to cost the passenger more money, and it's going to take you longer to do the journey, and it will be longer before you get to your next journey. So that's a problem. Now, if we widen our areas, that means that drivers have got to have an in-depth, a certain degree of knowledge of a greater area. And as we're seeing in, I think it's Northamptonshire, where drivers are facing the prospect of having to take 2 or 3 year sabbaticals unpaid to learn a bigger area when they may have been driving for 30 years, and that's not right. So we strongly recommend that the zones be retained, and as I've said in my response to the consultation, for a minimum of 5 years, and then subject to consultation with the local trades.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, I'm an operator, so like with Andrew, cancellation works both ways. It is annoying as an operator seeing jobs being cancelled by drivers multi-apping. Obviously these days we're a competing platform to Uber, Bolt, etc. So in the old days, if drivers were cancelling jobs, we could penalise them, or we could grade them as drivers. And obviously in the new world where drivers are self-employed, you've got worker status issues. So we have less power to help to encourage drivers to accept jobs. And I agree the contract should be with the operator, so it is quite frustrating. So I think the solution for that is we've started to develop better relationships with drivers and explain to them what happens when they cancel the job. Also, I think the solution in part is with software, so we've developed some software. So if a driver is cancelling, we physically fire off a text to him to let him know how much work he's just let go by. Because what they're doing is they're cherry picking, I get a better rate there with Uber or Bolt or so on. So part of that, the answer to that is I think our drivers earn more with us. We're not taking 45% commission or 35% commission, so it's about educating them that. So what we use now is software to sort of let them know actually you're earning more with us, that you've missed out on £200 worth of work, and you've been working for Uber doing smaller jobs and less, so it's about re-education. But it is a problem in the industry, and we hate letting customers down, and it's an awful feeling when you see that job being sort of rejected by drivers.
Thank you. Abdul?
Good afternoon, the panel. I'm the chair of the Hackney Garage in Oldham. 21 different councils are working in Oldham, and the Wolverhampton is predominantly working there as well. And we Hackney Garage completely on our knees. Our job is finished, and I did respond to your request when asked by it, but certainly the legislation, which is 2015 was made, deregulation, that should be abolished. That should be finished, because that was ill-prepared, ill things, and I think that the new legislation will come, and the people should work their own territories rather than invading the other one. Like Manchester have a recent survey, they have mentioned it, 12,941 different councils are working in the vehicles are working in Manchester area. And predominantly, my email is very hard, and I continuously emailing to the licensing, to the council chairs, and also the council leader as well, but no remedies, because they can't stop them, because they're parking anywhere they like, illegally, on our end. So what can we do? I think that we are rely on your intelligence, that we make the new legislation and get the job done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Paul? Paul, and then we have somebody at the back, Andrew at the back, and one here.
It's Mark Burser from Professional Driver Magazine.
Sorry, Mark.
Easy to get us mixed up. I'm on with the hair.
Oh.
I find it quite shocking to hear a National Trade Association advocating against cross-border hiring, which Stephen said earlier on. He thinks it should stop. I mean, I think it's been a very, very positive thing for the industry in terms of passenger safety and also environmental regulations, that you don't have cars running empty. Getting vehicles running empty off the road and having full vehicles taking people back where they're coming from is absolutely vital. I think there seems to be a lot of noise and a lot of confusion about what actually we're talking about in cross-border hire, and we've written quite extensively about this in Pro Driver Magazine as a big feature in the current issue you might want to read. The issue of all those Wolverhampton plated cars in Manchester that gave Andy Burnham a wobbler weren't Wolverhampton drivers travelling up to Manchester to take the work from his local Manchester drivers. Far from it. They were Manchester drivers who had gone to Wolverhampton to get licensed because the Manchester licensing was so terrible. It took 10 months to get a license and it cost twice as much. So why would you not go to Wolverhampton? The counter argument then that Wolverhampton is somehow poorer in terms of standards is demonstrably not the case, as Jim said earlier on. I mean, the standards are pretty consistent between most major cities in the UK. The bigger problem seems to be that the ride-hailers are doing something completely different. I mean, if you go to somewhere like Brighton, where Uber is not licensed, you have Uber cars operating there that are licensed elsewhere, because Uber imposed its own regional system independently of any licensing regime several years ago. So the cars are registered in Crawley or somewhere else, and then just go and sit in Brighton all the time. These things don't seem to be taken into account in the regulation. That there's good cross-border and there's bad cross-border, and I think we're losing sight of what we're trying to achieve here. I'd just like to see if Jim particularly has any views on that, given his advocacy of his own plan, which we talked about here 2 years ago.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think you're right. There's got to be a recognition that people travel across local authority borders. The only people who really know where local authority borders lie are local authority officers and members. Yes, of course. But you know, borders run down the middle of rivers, down the middle of high streets, along hedge bottoms and all sorts. So there's got to be a recognition that people will travel wherever they want to go. I think your point is very well made, that having empty vehicles driving about is daft. And the more effective it can be to put passengers in those seats, the better it has to be for everybody, for the operator, for the driver, and for the environment. In terms of consistency, we've got to have, as I said earlier, a consistent approach. And whether that consistent approach is predicated by national regulations or whether it is by a consensus, I'm not particularly sure matters. But what does matter is that consistency. My suggestion was, before all this talk about new legislation, not that's new, I mean there was talk about new legislation with the Law Commission of dim and distant memory, but my suggestion was that you could have one local authority acting as the national licensing authority with the support of all the other local authorities. Now that has had its time because we've moved on, we're getting new law. But it may be, and I'm not necessarily saying it is, but it may be that that is a model worth examining for the new law. We wait to see. But I think there are a lot of ideas, and we need to make sure that all those ideas are fed in to this particular melting pot. My ideas, all the panel's ideas, all of your ideas, and the ideas from the public, because as Ruth has made clear, as far as the public are concerned, they want to go from where they are to where they want to go. They want it to be convenient, they want it to be safe, and they want it to be affordable. And if those three criteria are met, I'm not sure that they really give much credence to whether that vehicle, when they get into it in, let's say, Brighton, was licensed in Brighton, Exeter, Aberystwyth, or Newcastle. They simply want that safe, convenient, and affordable journey. And that has got to be an aim. Within that, and the final point, it's got to make it worthwhile for you to run that business. Because if it isn't, you won't. You'll go and do something else. So this affordability question is a delicate balance. Okay.
I think it's worth noting as well, over here. It's worth... Sorry, go on.
Sorry, I forgot your name, but Mark illustrated my point exactly. The reason drivers who live in Manchester register in Wolverhampton is cheapness and speed, and some do so in different places because of standards for drivers. But as soon as we not only need, and the government has accepted this in the King's speech today, that there need to be in fact, they'd already put it in the Devolution, which is a bill, which I guess is now an act, I think. Is that the local authorities need to be effective at their turnaround, and even actually TfL, which is the biggest licensing authority, I've had constituents complaining about their inefficiency, and in fact they accepted. So they gave drivers who'd been delayed too long with their renewal, I think a bun, £300, £500, something like that. They accepted they were wrong. So size isn't a guarantee of efficiency, but I think the government is expecting standards of processing, and I would expect price for the new local authorities that are going to be running the systems, so that drivers have no need to register in different authorities, because, as I say, it's the incentive and disincentive that has driven out of, you said quite rightly, it's not where drivers live, it's where they choose and why they choose to go to a different authority, and hopefully, a lot of the changes will do away with that.
The price discrepancies are enormous.
Yeah, they are massive, massive. Yeah, some are 3 times, 4 times the Wolverhampton's price, so that has to be addressed. Interesting point Jim made, do we want a single national licensing authority? Well, recent experiences for many people of the DVSA and the DVLA may have something, maybe some views on that, but logic would suggest maybe, and also because there's what are the transport authorities looking like? Obviously Greater Manchester, West Midlands, you can see what that authority looks like and the size it's going to be, but even the new combined local authorities are going to be small. They're still going to be quite small, and there's still going to be quite a lot of authorities, although far fewer than there are at the moment.
I think it's also worth noting that, as I said at the introduction to this particular part, we don't like the fact that the term cross-border. The actual mischief here is predominant out-of-area use. So you're quite right. If somebody is taking a job from Manchester to Stockport or from Manchester to Birmingham, then that's fine. It's pre-booked. Nothing wrong with that. That's cross-border working. If they're booked to come back from Birmingham, or if they get a follow-up trip to come back from Birmingham, so they're not coming back empty, perfectly fine. That's pre-booked. That's cross-border working. But if they're sat around in Birmingham full-time, that's predominant out-of-area use, and that's the mischief we're trying to achieve. And we think, and we have suggested several times, and we will continue to suggest, that the combined approach of Section 75(1)A, which limits the availability of drivers once they've cleared out of their area, and the use of intended use policies, whose only intention is to limit the predominant out-of-area private hire use for hand carriage vehicles. If that was expanded onto all, then it doesn't stop. It doesn't hinder the removal of dead mileage. It doesn't hinder the ability of drivers being able to receive a return trip. What it does is it ensures that if you are applying for a licence in the likes of Wolverhampton, then it is intended that most of your work will be done within Wolverhampton, whether that's 4 days out of 7 per week, whether it's 3 weeks out of 4 per month, or whether it's 7 months out of 12 per year. The predominant use is the issue. So it doesn't stop people being able to work out of town. It just stops them being able to work permanently out of town.
But that's not the same thing, is it? If you're a Manchester driver who's got to wait 10 months to get his licence in Manchester, so you go to Wolverhampton, you're never going to work in Wolverhampton ever. You're only going to go back to Wolverhampton to renew your licence. You're going to work in Manchester. That's the only thing you're going to do. That's why you're doing it.
I completely agree with you. And don't forget, let's not forget, before it was Wolverhampton, it was Rosendale. And it was exactly the same thing then. They were coming to Rosendale because at the time, it was 2 years in Manchester and 18 months in Salford. Nobody's going to wait that long to get a job. You need to get to work, you need to earn money, you need to provide a service to the community, and that's what you're getting your licence for. And it is hoped that the national standards, if it is, as Ruth has suggested, including the conditions and requirements of local authorities, that will remove the need for licensed shopping. If it includes the turnaround time, so it doesn't matter which council you're going to, you're not going to be waiting any longer for your licence and you can get to work, that will stop this desire to go from Manchester to Wolverhampton or to Knowsley or to Sefton, because it isn't just Wolverhampton, don't forget. But we need to be addressing all of it. We need to find the key problem, which there is no one key problem. There's a whole network of problems, and we need to put all that together. We need to be very careful how we put this new legislation together so that we're not impacting the public, we're not impacting the operators, and we're not impacting the drivers. We're actually putting a nail on this coffin once and for all and closing it and having a fresh slate and a fresh start.
Wolverhampton invested millions in getting its system right and working, and Manchester hasn't. Are you going to force Manchester to spend money it hasn't got, because local councils tend to be bankrupt anyway, in investing to somehow match Wolverhampton? Or are you just going to
It's
Wolverhampton in the
self-funding.
first place?
It's a ring-fenced budget.
Yeah.
So why does it take 10 months to go license it?
Doesn't take that much matter. I'm a Manchester operator.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I've been working in Manchester for 30 years. Yeah, I'm an operator in Manchester. So,
How quick is it?
yeah, I mean, we abolished the knowledge test 2 years ago. It was Dave North.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I did a test 30 years ago, which was a written test. In a multi-choice test, I was involved in it. People can pick. So you must know where you're going, as Jim said. You know, and so everybody obviously using app. But anyway, I'll come to it after.
Yeah, come back to, because we've got other people waiting as well. Stephen and David, briefly, and then to you, sir.
I was just going to address the environmental issue of dead mileage. Now, as a Hackney driver myself, and I do work for a local operator as well, dead mileage is the bane of my life, and I want to cut it down as much as possible. But my 31 years experience tells me that the bigger area you cover in terms of where you pick up passengers from, the more dead mileage you'll have. So let's talk about this fabled journey back. It's a rarity. Even working for an operator as I do, who actively looks for journeys back for you, I can tell you the number of times I've had a journey back from an airport where I've dropped off by an operator that actually tries to facilitate that. In 31 years, I've had 4. If you're a Hackney Carriage driver, I read in the best practice guidance 2023 that if you're a Hackney Carriage driver, you should be allowed to drop off in another part of your enlarged area and get a journey back. How are you going to do that as a Hackney Carriage driver on a ramp? You can't pick your passengers, you've got to take the first one. And also, even if whether it's a pre-booked job or not, if you're waiting for another job in another area, the next job may take you even further away. And if you're waiting for a journey back, you might have a very long wait. As I say, in my experience, the bigger area you cover, the more dead mileage you'll have. So these fabled journeys back, all of that, they're mythic. They're very rare.
Okay, thank you, Stephen.
Hello, hi there. My name is Nick Beans. I'm a Gatwick driver and I'm a Unite representative. Hi, Ruth, how are you? Yeah, I'd like to say that every job in town's dead mileage. No matter what, every job. There is no way you are going to drop off in an area outside there and pick up immediately there. That doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. I know it doesn't happen because I've been a taxi driver for 30 years. So, yeah, there you go. So there is never a job that you actually drop off and pick up exactly the same way you know. It might be a mile, it might be 500 yards, it could be 2 miles. You know, and if you do go out of area, then you have to travel back. But if you're doing, say, 20 or 30 jobs in that one day, then you could have 20 or 30 miles of dead mileage in that day. So there is no difference. There is dead mileage in our work. And going back to what Dave said earlier, the 76 Act, Section 75 and 1A is not enforced. Nobody enforces it. Nobody enforces it. Why don't they enforce it? You cannot wait in an area where you are not licensed. Is that a fact, Mr. Barnett?
No, you can. The law makes it.
If you have a booking.
No, not if you have a booking. Standing or flying for hire. You can be in another area for as long as you like.
So what is flying for hire then? If you are on an app, if you are seen, hang on, please. If you have an app that's open, yeah, you can actually see that area, and they're not there, are they applying for hire? Because you can see
the case law
it's
has
virtual.
The case law has made it clear that having an app is not applying for hire. Being available on an app is not applying for hire. Hold on. Just hold on.
When was that law? When was the law? When was it done?
Firstly, there's a distinction between standing for hire and applying for hire. It is unfortunate that over 150 years of case law, those two have become conflated into one term, standing and applying for hire, which is like Walkman Wise or Ant and Dec. You don't see one without the other, but they are different. When you analyse the law, standing for hire is when a vehicle is stationary at a hackney carriage stand or elsewhere on a street. The vehicle is stationary. That's standing. Plying is when the vehicle is cruising and it can respond to a hailing. Yes. And when you analyse the legislation, you can see that they are different concepts. So that's the first point. As to what is meant by standing for hire is a matter of case law. And the case law is where the senior courts, which is the High Court, the Court of Appeal, or the Supreme Court, has interpreted the law, explained what it means. Case law makes it clear that to be standing for hire, the vehicle must be exhibited to the prospective passenger. In other words, the prospective passenger must be able to see that actual vehicle, not a picture of a vehicle, not a representation of a vehicle on an app. The actual vehicle. That's the first point.
But when does that?
Just hold. So, could you just let me finish that? The second point to standing for hire is that the vehicle is made available for immediate hire. And that is evidenced by the actions of the driver when a prospective passenger approaches them. So you have a private hire vehicle parked legitimately at the side of the road. When I say legitimately, it's not on double yellow lines or zigzags or anywhere else. It's parked where anybody else could lawfully park. A prospective passenger walks up to that driver and says, for the sake of argument, can you take me to the railway station? So the vehicle is exhibited because that passenger can see it. The question then is, what does the driver do? If the driver says, yes, hop in, that is standing for hire because it's available for immediate hire. If the driver says, no, look, I'm terribly sorry, I'm a private hire driver, you have to book me through my operator, which may be the telephone number on the side of the vehicle, it may be an app, then that is not available for immediate hire. Now, whether you agree with that or not is another argument. That is what our courts have said. That is what the law means. And unless and until that law is altered, that is the situation. So a private hire vehicle can quite legitimately, with its driver, be parked in Manchester lawfully, notwithstanding the fact that it is licensed by Wolverhampton. Now, as I say, if we don't like that, and I quite understand why people don't like that, now is the opportunity to get that law altered. But that is how the law stands as of today.
Okay, so that's case law. When was that?
The most recent one was Reading versus Anna,
What was
wasn't
the
it?
year that was done?
It's
That is pre-act, yeah?
No, it's interpretations of the 1976 Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act, Part 2, and the Reading case. I mean, there's 150 years of case law, but the most recent are the Reading case, which was, I think, 2016, if I remember rightly, followed by the Court of Appeal decision in about 2020. I can give you chapter and verse when I can look at my textbook. So it's well subsequent the passing of the Act, because that Act is 50 years old this year. That case law is built on the case law over the last 150 years, but is within the last decade. You can take it back to court, and unless and until the Supreme Court rules, because it's a Court of Appeal decision, it isn't going to change. And even if the Supreme Court got to see a case the chances of it overturning the Court of Appeal and that 150 years of case law history, I would not bet on that.
More details can be found on Button on Taxes.
Indeed.
Right, Andy? I'll see you in 3 weeks.
Thank you. Andy Mahoney, 24/7. I'll go back to Ruth and just try and answer or probe what you said in the first place. Baroness Casey basically said that it's not good cross-border. Rotherham had to hire their standards to keep people safe in Rotherham. I think everybody in this room would agree, and I would hope that everybody in this room would agree, that public safety is the most important thing about private hire and hackney carriage. It's what it's all about. It's why it was licensed in the first place. Why should Rotherham have to have a higher standard of safeguarding than Cornwall? Why would a girl in Brighton not be protected as much as a girl in Rotherham? It's not cross-border hiring that is the problem. The problem is lower standards in other areas. And that goes for cars and everything. We need a national standard that is good for today. We need to protect everybody the same. That way, if a driver is licensed in Cornwall and he decides he's going to move to Northumberland, he shouldn't need to go through everything else again. He's already passed a national standard. In exactly the same way as a solicitor can work wherever he wants, or anybody else that has got a trade and a licence to work, they can work wherever they want, except in our business. National standard that ensures that everybody is kept safe. Everybody seems to worry about people trading in our area. They're not, they're trading in their area. We all know that they go to different areas to get licensed. Well, if Oldham Council can't get their act together and Wolverhampton can, or Manchester can't, or Brighton can't, then go get licensed wherever you want to the same standard. And that is all I'm saying really, is I think it's all about standards. Costs will resolve themselves because people will go for the cheaper licence, and if it's at the same standard, why not? Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I think...
I agree. No need. Yeah, that's fine. You said that it's a question for me, but you made a statement and I agree with you.
Okay. I think it's important to note, Baroness Casey report was originally 2012. 3 years before the Deregulation Act that she blamed the cross-border issue on. 3 years before that Act came into place. It's also worth noting that the only difference between Rotherham and Wolverhampton, as an example, is the presence of CCTV. It's also worth noting there isn't a council in the land that will openly say, we've got the lowest standards in the country. They will all say their standards are the highest and everybody else should match theirs. Every single one of them. Okay? National standards is coming. Whether they're going to be absolute or minimum, hopefully absolute. But that's coming. And that's what that is being kick-started next week with the first meeting, then there's another one 2 weeks after that, and it's going to be ongoing and ongoing and ongoing. As Jim said, how long that takes to put in place is anybody's guess. But I can tell you that the government are moving at record speed on this in comparison to anything else that we've ever seen. Jim?
Yeah, if I may, just for completeness, the Reading case is Reading against Ali. That's a High Court decision in 2019. And then the Court of Appeal decision is the crown on the application of the United Trade Action Group Limited against Transport for London, which was 2022. And that's available from Bloomsbury Publishing.
And signed by you.
It was a wrong decision though.
Right, Annabelle, where are you? Go behind you there.
Two questions or points.
Okay.
The comment about a Wolverhampton driver being in Manchester and taking a fare from Manchester, but he has to be legally given that job by a Wolverhampton operator.
Yes.
So if you've got a situation in South East London where one of the major companies there is actually holding a TfL licence and a Wolverhampton licence, so what's the problem with the driver having a Wolverhampton licence if he can get the job up there, if he can get his licence in Wolverhampton? The other question I was going to ask is, so I live right on the borders of Sevenoaks Council, Dartford Council and TfL. Which licence am I meant to take my clients?
Okay. Anybody? Jim?
Sorry, it sounds as if it's just me. A private hire operator can advertise their services anywhere.
I am an operator as well.
Right. So you can advertise your services anywhere. If you're licensed in Sevenoaks, you can advertise in Sheffield, should you wish to. A passenger located anywhere can contact any private hire operator located anywhere in England and Wales to make a booking, and that operator can accept that booking for a journey which starts anywhere, travels anywhere and finishes anywhere. So in terms of where you choose to be licensed, we're back to the point Mark said. You're going to go where it's cheapest and quickest to get licensed, which at the moment is largely Wolverhampton. That Wolverhampton operator, you're quite right, that driver can only accept a booking issued by that Wolverhampton operator. But if, for the sake of argument, I contact an operator located in Birmingham, and that Birmingham operator so wishes, they can subcontract that to a Wolverhampton operator. And the question as to whether or not that's lawful has been answered, Milton Keynes and Skyline. It can be done by computer. The records, the booking records that you as an operator have to maintain can be computerised, and those will demonstrate that subcontracting process in accordance with the legislation. So ultimately, where you wish to be licensed is a question for you as the operator. Where is it going to be most efficient and effective for you, for your business? And then I'm back to where I was. I am not convinced, and you may all shout me down and say I'm wrong, but I am not convinced that passengers are particularly worried about where you are licensed. What they're worried about is that you as a driver are a fit and proper person, you as an operator are a fit and proper person, and the vehicle is safe. And if those three are met, I don't think the public are concerned. Now, I may be wrong, and bearing in mind, you know, my background is in local government, and of course I want those authorities to have the right approach. But if we're looking at public safety, and we've got to look at that, as we've all said, is that really fundamental?
I would.
Can I say I once got a Heathrow, not that long ago, from Heathrow to Richmond. I needed to get to where I needed to get to quickly. I needed to work in the back of a cab, so it was better than tube or train for me for that journey. The driver was registered either with TfL and or with Heathrow, so I wanted to sit and get on with my work. I told him that I was going to what we now call the Alliance Stadium, and he said, yeah, okay, fine, I'm not sure what the traffic's doing. And I said, well, surely the sat-nav, your sat-nav will tell you whether the A316 or the A4 is the best way to go. And he says, oh, well, I don't use sat-nav. And I went, well, can't you put on Google Maps on your phone? And he says, well, can't you? And I went, well, yes, I could, and I could give you the answer, but I want to sit in the back and work. That's why I'm paying for a cab, which I wouldn't normally do. So I hope there's none of that anymore, because that's fairly basic. Anyway, I know the lady behind you also wants to speak.
Yeah. I was just going to say that personally I'm for cross-bordering because of where I live. I couldn't survive with if I was as an operator in those areas. But we come back to, though, we have to get a national standard. And that's where it is. But for me as an operator, I'm so close to those three licensing divisions. How would I choose where I take my work from? I have to be cross-border.
Jim answered your question.
Oh, yeah.
You may find as a result of devolution that some of those councils will be absorbed into the new unitary authority anyway, which will reduce your choices. Yeah.
Just between three authorities, between three regions.
Yeah. But I think I think very briefly before bringing the other lady in, so Matt's got something to say as well, but I think to come back on something Jim said, the public don't care about which council you're licensed by. With the greatest respect, the public don't even care if you're licensed. They don't know what fit and proper is. They don't look at plates. They don't look at door stickers. They don't look at any of that. All they see is that a vehicle's turned up, they're drunk, they want to go home, they think they're going to get home safely, and that's it. If you ask a member of the public what's fit and proper, they just look at you like you just ask them to, well, I don't know what you've asked them to do, because they don't know, they don't care. So that's down to us, it's down to our publicity, it's down to us to educate the public. And the only way to do that is with national standards and with us all working together and recognising that actually there is no us versus them, we are one team. We rely on the council to do publicity as to what is correct and what is right. They rely on us to provide a professional service, which most of you do. Mike, very quickly, and then the lady at the back waiting to speak. Okay, lady at the back.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Phoebe Bond and I'm from the Children's Society, so I appreciate I'm actually kind of not from the sector or the industry, but I work in a national programme trying to improve the way that we respond to child exploitation, so all of what you've talked around Casey is obviously really important. We speak to young people, we ask young people about different groups in society. We consult young people on kind of their experience of safety in neighbourhoods, and they talk to us about how they don't believe that a taxi driver would have the time or the resources if they believed that that child was in harm's way to report it. And so I suppose what I'm wondering is, I've listened a lot kind of around lots of themes in the industry recently, and it feels like there's a tension between the responsibility and the expectation of safeguarding, but also the culture of immediacy that we have, and the pressure on drivers. I've just listened to a lot of people talk about the level of competition between big companies and small companies. And I guess what I'm wondering is, even if we introduce national standards that improve the safeguarding training that drivers receive, how are we going to support drivers to have the time and because drivers, we've also gone out and consulted drivers, and drivers have told us that they are penalised by losing income should they report an incident to the police. And so what I was wondering is, how do we navigate trying to improve safeguarding, but also not penalise drivers for doing the right thing? And I was really interested in people who have experience in the trade, if they wouldn't mind sharing kind of their views on that balance of how we, encourage people to care about kids in the community, but also I don't want to be putting people under, financial pressure by encouraging people to report what they suspect might be child abuse.
Okay, an excellent point, and thank you for being in and raising this. It's something that we as the NPHTA are very active with. We're very in touch with a lot of the organisations like Operation Make Safe and things like that. A couple of years ago I was at Lampack which is the Lancashire Police Against Crime, and we were discussing safeguarding and grooming and things like that. And I was mortified that one of the questions that was asked for hoteliers and for the nighttime economy is if you suspected that there was something untoward about that adult and child that you have, would you give them a room? And everybody in the room said, no, we wouldn't, we would tell them to go away. I put my hand up and I said, are you nuts? Are you absolutely crazy? If you think there was something wrong and you say, no, you're not having a room, that person's going to go into the next hotel and they're going to do whatever you thought they were going to do. Whereas if you give them a room and then ring the police, you've then imprisoned them without them even knowing it. You've exercised safeguarding. But I do think, and I will say this very, very clearly before I hand back over to the panel, that a lot of this is down to the publicity. You've just heard it yourself. As a result of what happened in Rotherham, taxi drivers were providing transport, just like train drivers, bus drivers, and yet the entire industry is blacklisted and accused of being groomers and child gang rapists and all the rest of it. And you see Peterborough, they recently did a consultation on mandatory CCTV. The drivers want it, the councils want it, but the drivers objected to it. And the reason they objected is not because it was CCTV, it was because the consultation started with, as a result of what we saw in Rotherham. So the trade said, how the hell can you accuse us of being that type of person? That's what blocked it. So a lot of it is down to the perception, publicity and training. And I can tell you right now, if not 100%, certainly 90 to 95% of the industry, they will be the first to make those reports. And they will sit there and they will make sure that that child is safe. And if they need to sit there for the police to attend, they will, because they feel, well, what if that was my child? And with that, I'm going to hand over to the panel.
If I may just quickly interject, Craig Blower for us.
Yep.
Dave and I are all actors. Dave, I have to say, most of what you said is brilliant. Dave, most of what you said, spot on, mate. Except for one thing.
Which is?
Load of bollocks. The local MP that came in with the new government harpooned it. Had nothing to do with it.
I'm sorry, you're wrong. I've spoken to the Rotherham Peterborough Council. I also spoke to Peterborough Trade Association, and that is exactly why they blocked it.
No.
Yes, it is.
Sorry.
Right. Mike?
Well, I'll interject there and just sort of go back to the original question around sort of safeguarding, if that's okay. So I think most authorities do require some form of safeguarding training, awareness training. Some of it may be a 20-minute online course, some of it may be a sort of day in the classroom. I think what we need to be sort of focused on, and certainly the licensing is focused on, is making sure that all drivers get the right level of safeguarding awareness training so that they feel confident in being able to do their jobs. I come from an authority in sort of Leafy, Surrey. All drivers have to do safeguarding awareness training. It's been in for some time as a result of the sort of first case inquiry. The trouble is, I think, is that most drivers see it as a thing they have to do in order to get a licence. It's not about that. It's about making sure you are in a position to have the knowledge and skills to keep your customers safe. And I feel most drivers, want to make sure that they are doing exactly that, because that's good for them. It's good for their business. It's good for the wider public. It's about making sure we've got the right, they're given the right sort of tools, the right examples, so that it's relevant to their role and they feel confident in doing it. I think sort of the wider issue around reporting is a different one, because drivers think, I'm not going to report that incident because the police won't do anything, or it's time off the road for me. I don't really see what we need to do is encourage a culture of drivers being confident in order to report things, be it sort of safeguarding awareness, because there's big sort of crimes against them, they know that something's going to be done, so sort of confidence in order to do that. I just want to sort of just go back to one thing. There's a lot of sort of questions here around sort of cross-border hire and out-of-road working. These, I may sort of be looking up. I've been doing this for 20 years, and these are the same questions we get day in, day out from drivers. And the instant licensing does sort of two very good taxi courses, so that you, as promoter of the trade, can come along to and know what the legislative framework in which local authorities and children operate. So there are some really good courses that you can come along to. It doesn't, today's course, well worth it. I can't see it on the hours, and go to the website to see the details. But that's my sort of little sales pitch. I want to just sort of come back onto the point around sort of local authorities and sort of differing standards. Yeah, it's right. There are vast discrepancies around standards and processing times in areas across the country. My concern with sort of nationally having a national standard for drivers and local authorities is fine, but a concern around sort of processing times is going to be quite difficult, because if you are mandating a sort of small authority with maybe 1,000 or so drivers to implement an all singing, all dancing slick system, if the system is self-funding, that cost is going to be passed on to the trade. That's then going to just drive members away to the bigger, already slick tube authorities who are spread that cost of licence over a vast number of holders. So I think it's something that needs to be really looked at carefully. I'm sure no local authority wants to keep drivers off the road. Believe it or not, we all want to do a good thing and provide a good service, but there are vast discrepancies at the moment, which may not be improved through mandating a standard if it forces local authorities to invest money they haven't got and pass that cost into a small number of license. So that's this point. So.
Yes, just over 20 years ago, I was the lead cabinet member in Hounslow for Children's Services and Education, and it was at the time of, if anybody in the government remembers, Every Child Matters, after a series of child deaths at the hands of families actually, but cruelty and neglect of children when one agency knew something was wrong but others didn't. That we were, as politicians, as local authority officers, as people working in schools, children's services, charities, etc., we were all made to understand and continuously re-educated in the need that we all had a responsibility to report whatever concerned us. And this strikes me, Phoebe, that something similar needs being done. And also your point about drivers are part of that eyes and ears when it comes to trafficking and exploitation of children, women, other vulnerable people. And when I was told by a local authority officer recently, when I asked the question, do we know if trafficking, particularly women and girls, happens in West London? Oh no, it doesn't happen here. Really? And it shocked me that we've gone backwards and we've got a wider issue. I don't know if taxis and private hire is being used for county lines, but there's another issue, and I would like to see your industry as part of those eyes and ears. And education isn't just at training; it's at retraining and so on, and giving drivers and operators and local authority officers sort of responsibilities and support, and definitely not tarring everyone with the brush of a few.
Okay, before we move on too much further, we've got 3 final questions because we are rapidly running, in fact we're seriously over time, it's only 4:10. So we've got 1, 2 and then the lady at the back there, and that will be the last questions, please. So if you can keep your responses relatively brief if you can.
This is really a question of the government. I just wanted to go back to the issue of drivers cancelling jobs, leaving people, vulnerable people, stranded, and this is being a problem with ride hailers. And it seems to stem from the issue around who the principal is in the job, whether it's the operator or the driver. And there's a ding-dong between the courts in different areas, and whether it's the driver's responsibility or whether it's the operator's responsibility. And it seems when it's the driver's responsibility, when the driver is deemed to be the principal, it's easy for them to just cancel the job and get away with it. Now, the DFT has recently just published some new guidance about travel, which integrates bus and train and taxi and private hire into a journey-based system rather than silos of train and bus. So you're looking at private hire being an integral part of the travel and the public transport system. Now, what's wrong with this picture? If you have a journey that involves a private hire vehicle to a railway station and a train journey and then another private hire vehicle, the private hire element of that is subject to VAT and the other bits are not. Now, what we're making here is a case What the DFT has made a case for is an abolition of VAT on private hire, making it zero rated. And if you do that, then you take away the arguments about who the principal is, you make it de facto the operator, and then you can regulate against Uber and co drivers cancelling jobs. You can then come down on them and make them provide a replacement. So you solve two problems at once. You solve the VAT problem and you solve the public safety problem. I'd like to know what you think of this, because it seems to me that this is contrary to some of the other decisions that have been made.
Okay. David, as an operator, how would you feel about that?
I think as an operator, ideally, yeah, we'd love to see no VAT, like other public transport services, such as, you know, if you've got a 9 seats or above, you're VAT exempt. And I think you're absolutely right, Mark. But and there's a lot of confusion on VAT as well, how we account for it. Part of our group, we franchise our brand to other tour operators, and I've seen some very weird and wonderful ways of accounting for VAT. And of course, that means that some operators are more competitive than others because they'll have a different way of accounting for VAT. I can't say the word scheme, but for obvious reasons, but yeah, so there's a lot of confusion on the principal agency model, and I think it does need setting out in stone, because I'm not first as an operator either way, but if that's how it is, then we all operate on the same basis. So, you know, it just needs to be laid out. But ideally, 0% would be great, because it saves a lot of time collecting the government's money for them and working out what that should be, and it also helps planning cash flow as well.
Okay. Ruth?
I'm not the government, and I'm sorry the civil servants have had to go back, but it sounds... I'm not going to answer the question because I don't know the answer, but anything that makes life easier for passengers, as an MP, as a representative, is fine by me. Technicalities is a bit beyond my pay grade right now, but you know, feel free to write to us. Or raise it, you know, as part of the legislative process. I should have said we will. Lillian has told me that there will be pre-legislation consultation. I don't know if that's white papers or green papers, but anyway, so you'll get a chance to input into the legislation before it formally comes to Parliament as a published bill, and we will look at it. Well, that means we should look at it as well. Whether we're going to fit it in, I don't know. Can I just say, thank you for a segue into integrated transport. A personal bugbear of mine, please do say something about pick up and drop off places. I've been to Spain and the US in the last 2 or 3 years. In both cases, the airports had separate private hire pick-up drop-off places, marked, labelled, signposted, which were separate to the city, the equivalent of black cabs or whatever, which were also signposted, marked and labelled. We seem to be actively, our planning system, and speaking as a town planner, we seem to be cancelling, deleting pick-up and drop-off, including that for private hire and often taxis as well, at big stations and so on. Also the length of distance that people have to walk. I was lobbied by somebody who struggles to walk, but certainly is not a wheelchair user, about how they were supposed to find where to get picked up or dropped off within reasonable walking distance of the station. So sorry, nothing to do with what we're talking about today, but it gives me a chance to ask you please to get involved with the integrated transport plan, even if it doesn't mention private hire.
I think the problem with the VAT and the integrated transport plan is the DFT guidance.
Rachel wouldn't like it.
The DFT guidance came out after the VAT consultation, so there's no joined up thinking there.
You to me, right to me.
Jump. Right, hang on, Sam.
I was going to answer the question on drivers cancelling trips. I think we also need to take steps to remove the incentive for drivers to do that. If a driver cancels a trip, it's for a reason. Usually because if we take Uber's Trip Radar as an example, those jobs fire out simultaneously to a number of drivers. One job offered to 6 different drivers at 6 different rates. and the driver at the time is driving a vehicle, may even also have a passenger on board, it's perfectly legal to touch your screen while you're driving if the screen is in the cradle, just as you can touch any other screen within your vehicle. But if you're engaged too much with these screens, you run the risk of not exercising proper control of the vehicle. So, we need to minimise the amount of time that drivers are spending interacting with the screens. One of the things that drivers are doing when they're being offered these trips, the driver's going to look at the trip, see where it is in relation to where they are, how far away it will be from where they drop off with their current passenger, where it's going, what the distance is, what the star rating of the passenger is, and how much they're going to get paid. They've got to take all of that information before they decide whether or not they want to accept the trip. Meanwhile, they're driving the car.
The car goes like
exactly.
That's
right.
40 miles an hour, gets to 20, 15.
Yeah.
If passengers are on the roundabout,
stop. So there's a public safety issue with that. So trip radar needs to be banned because it's dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely.
But also, if the driver hurriedly accepts a trip because he doesn't want to spend too much time looking at his screen and wants to drive the car, and then subsequently realises, wait a minute, it's 10 miles away, it's only going a mile, and I'm only going to get paid £4 for it. So if I do that job, I'm actually going to be doing it at a loss. So then they cancel it. So if we made sure that every job was worth accepting, and drivers weren't being bombarded with offers where they effectively got to engage in a bidding war at the same time as drive the car, we might remove the need for drivers to cancel.
Okay. Sam, very briefly, and then we've got two more.
Good afternoon, and thanks, Ruth, for attending our committee here. Pleasure. I was at the Parliament in October, and we've talked a lot. We've mentioned everything. We've spoken here about the grooming, which Dave and yourself said. Obviously, that was in 2012. Deregulation Act was in 2015, and there's no mention of cross-border hire in Deregulation Act. And Steve just mentioned about the, drivers cancelling jobs. I'm an operator in Manchester. I've been an operator for the last 30 odd years. And sometimes operators, because the drug dealers, they cancel the job because they don't want to pick them up. You're running round. Yep. And they know it, they use wrong address. I've experienced it myself. If they live at 10 Boardman Road, but they're using 6 Gainsborough Street at the back, you're using a false address. And I said, excuse me, you must give me a correct address. I was there on the phone, sometime they ringed up or they booked through the app. And so there's so many issues, reasons why. And also because depending on the job, if the job is a cash or is paid online, then these are the issues as well. And drivers, the Uber is all online because they get paid during the week, transfer the money through their account. But some firms, they use online and they use cash as well. And that's where the drivers are cancelling it as well. Because it's a job, £2 job, to cancel it, sometimes they don't want to do it. And that happens all the time, and that's been happening for many, many years. Yeah? And coming back to the gentleman Mark's question, yes, I mean, sometimes because obviously drivers are going into Wolverhampton getting badge, which is cheaper, and also, but now even in Wolverhampton, it's like a 6 months, 8 months waiting list. You can't get a badge within 4 weeks. You've got to wait for your DBS first. That's with all across, every licensing authority in Manchester is 4 to 6 weeks. It's not 10 months. Andy Burnham is talking, which is a broken system because of cross-border hire. We've got nearly 13,000 drivers working in Manchester, which is ridiculous because they're ranking up on taxi ranks. Piccadilly Station, they're ranking up. I've been attending meetings every month, Dave knows, and also Ruth just mentioned in Manchester Piccadilly, or whether it's Manchester Airport, private hire, whether it's Victoria Station and Hackney Carriage, the pick up point. There's no that Hackney Carriage is separate. They have a separate Hackney Carriage rank, they have a feeder rank, but when it's a pick up point, it's equalled. Always have been. So when you go to Piccadilly Station, Hackney Carriage picks up there, private hire picks up there, all the private hires. But the private hire, and there's no such thing, oh, this is the Uber parking. No, it's not.
need to speed you up if you've got a question.
Hang on. The main question is that all the companies, they do not use triple lock system. You already mentioned, Jim, that it has to be a booking from Wolverhampton and that job should be passed on. They don't use that. Uber only has one office in the whole of Manchester and even in Midlands. And when the report was done at the Parliament last time with the transport, and Uber was telling lies that they have an office in every town. No, they don't. They only have one office in the whole of the Northwest.
And we have evidence to suggest that Uber do not subcontract at all.
And they do not. And a lot of companies who have multiple operators license, they do not subcontract because some authorities, enforcement is going in and asking them and checking on the computer systems. And where before some of them been penalised, they are contacting Dave, they contact myself, asking for advice. So, you know, all the system is up the wall. So they're not using the system properly. You cannot put 01 on a Wolverhampton plate or 161 numbers. It has to be a Wolverhampton telephone number.
Sham, question?
Well, I've explained that.
Right. Gentleman there, and then a lady with the purple jacket there. And then we're done. When I said we're closing at 7 on Thursday, I was joking.
My name is Darren Harris. I'm a solicitor and director of CheckSafe. My question is specifically around the enforcement of the new rules in relation to private hire taxis. So we've seen the new Devolution Act, which suggests that enforcement officers can take to task drivers out of other areas. We've seen a sort of veiled threat. Will enforcement officers have the courage to do it because of the potential for compensation? So if it's a large operator, the potential for compensation could be significant. So will the enforcement officer have the courage to do that? Does that not mean that probably the better way of tackling this is to bring this within the traffic commissioners and all licence regime? I did read the transcripts, and I don't know if it was a question posed by you, Ruth, to one of the people who gave evidence. Is this a matter for traffic commissioners? It's a ready-made system. It works very well for all licensed vehicles, wagons, buses and all the rest of it. It would be easy to slot taxis into that regime. There's an ultimate arbitration for it. And there's a whole set of people out there ready to pull vehicles and inspect them.
And you started off with your first mistake, private hire or taxi. Which one? Okay. Anybody?
Terminology.
Anybody?
Both private hire and taxis, it amounts to the same thing, isn't it?
Jim, Ruth? Ruth?
I'm going to say something. Because I'm from London, I don't know enough about what the traffic commissioners do. But, as I said, there's pre-legislative process, so get involved with that. If you've got a view about any of this stuff, get it in to government and to us as well, if we do an inquiry into the new legislation that was announced today. Secondly, one thing we have in London is elected councillors are not involved with licences, renewals, etc. It has been suggested that actually the removal of elected councillors, local councillors, from the process might be a good thing.
Okay. Jim?
That was suggested by the Institute of Licensing. As it stands, our view is the councillors decide on the policy. The actual day-to-day assessment of fitness and propriety, suitability of vehicle should be by experienced professional officers.
Okay, lady at the back.
Yeah, I just want. My name's Alicia Dale. I currently work for Luton Borough Council. I did work for a private hire operator for about 10 years, but I've been in Luton Council for about 2 years, so I've been both sides, and I particularly work with homeschool transport at the moment. So I kind of wanted to come back to Phoebe's point, and I think focusing on something positive, that actually a large part of the private hire community do work on homeschool transport routes, and it's really important to mention that quite a lot of disclosures come through those routes, because actually
children, young people might feel less like they're talking to someone face to face, but actually the driver's focusing on driving and they can make that disclosure. So I think it's really important to focus on the positives. However, I also think there is potentially quite a lot of gaps. I mean, we've talked today about how, I know Jim mentioned that a person who's safe in one area should be safe in another, and actually the different standards currently, and I echo what everybody said about national standards. But I do also think, perhaps to our licensing colleagues, consider, is there enough being done in terms of safer recruitment checks? Is that being considered? And also in terms of, those national standards really, and working not as a siloed industry, but collaboratively with our safeguarding colleagues, whether that be MASH, LADO, our education colleagues, our adult social care. Can that be brought into this as consideration to work more collaboratively for the safeguarding purposes?
I think that's a really good point. I'll just sort of say a few words before Jim steps in. Most local authorities want to make sure that their drivers are safe, absolutely. And in the vast majority of cases, the barrier isn't with the local authority officer making the decision, it is with the information they get from others, such as either the police or other agencies. I'm dealing with a driver at the moment who has been a driver for a long time. I looked at their licence in 2019, following a report of them allegedly committing a sexual assault in a taxi. They, according to the police, they have also been subject to a similar allegation in 2007. They were revoked in 2019. They come back again to us, having not been convicted. However, their DBS is clear. However, there is no other relevant information on the DBS to say that they have been, the taxi driver have been subject to 2 separate allegations of sexual assault. And in my view, that is wrong. That is information that should be put on the DBS, in order for us to make a licence use. However, it isn't. So I think most local authorities want drivers to be safe and want drivers to be able to equip with the sort of tools and skills they need in order to carry out the sort of the eyes and ears, as we said before. But in most occasions, my view is that local authorities are being hampered with the information they get rather than the other way around.
What I'd just like to finish off by saying is, it's very easy to focus on the negative. It's very easy to hold up the lousy drivers as examples. Every industry has the same problems. You get a councillor who is taking backhanders, heaven forbid. All councillors are corrupt. You get a solicitor who is forging documents. All solicitors are bent. That isn't the case, okay? In every industry, there is the good, the bad and the ugly. And the vast majority of people in your industry are good. And we need to focus on that, and we need to build on that, and eradicate the lousy.
And that is exactly what the industry wants as well. Because the bad apples out there bring the rest of you down. Because as Jim just said, it's always the minority, and it's the majority that suffer and pay the price.
Is that the last question, or?
That was the last question, I'm afraid, because we're at nearly 4:30.
Yeah, just a quick, that the new legislation coming and giving the powers to the enforcement, that's not going to make any difference. It's not made any difference in the last 30, 40 years, because towns like Bury, they've got 2 enforcement officers. We will have been using, in Warrington, only 1. Manchester has 3, 4 or 5. Well, it's a very big city. It's not going to make any
We covered that in the previous questions.
They all need to learn from Wolverhampton's processes.
We will have to process charging past the test now.
Right. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thank you to the panel. Thank you to Ruth, Jim Button, Mike Smith, Stephen Toy, David Hunter, slap on the head, and Andrew Wescott from Veezu. And thank you, more importantly, thank you for your questions. It's been very interesting.